When my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "Dad lives here because I allow it," I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply smiled, set down the groceries I had bought with my own pension, and said, "Then you'll have no reason to see me again." She thought it was an older man's bluff. It wasn't. That night, I walked out of the mansion I built and paid for, the house where my late wife's laughter once lived. A week later, their mortgage bounced, their cars lost insurance, and the life they'd built on my generosity began to crumble, one bill at a time. They thought they'd humiliated me. They were wrong. This was the beginning of their education. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let me tell you how it all began. My keys were still warm in my palm when I opened the front door. The afternoon light spilled through the tall windows of the living room, the kind of soft, honeyed glow that usually made the house feel alive. But that day, it only made the silence heavier. I stood there for a moment, grocery bags cutting into my wrists, breathing in the faint scent of sandalwood candles and expensive perfume. Isabel's perfume. The same one that costs more than my monthly utility bills. The same one she used to mark every corner of this house, as if it was hers. She was sitting in my recliner, my wife Elaine's recliner, the one I'd kept for 20 years after she passed. Isabel sat there with one leg draped lazily over the other, scrolling through her phone, her silk robe catching the light like liquid silver. "Ah, Richard," she said without looking up, "you're home early." The word home caught in my throat. "Yes," I said quietly, setting the bags down on the kitchen counter. "Thought I'd beat the traffic from Stamford." She turned then, slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they want you to know they're not in a hurry for your presence. "Would you mind pouring me some tea?" she asked. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of expectation, the kind that assumes obedience. I blinked. "Tea?" "Yes, the Earl Grey, 2 sugars, no lemon." She smiled faintly, not at me, but at her reflection in the black glass of the television screen. I didn't move right away. My fingers tightened slightly around the grocery bags. They'd left red marks across my palms. "I just came in, Isabel," I said finally. "Give me a moment to put these away." Her head tilted, the smile fading just enough to reveal what was underneath. Impatience. "Andrew usually gets it for me when I ask," she said, voice light as air, words heavy as stone. "Well, Andrew's not here," I replied. She sighed, leaning back into the recliner like a queen indulging a servant. "Then perhaps you could try harder to make yourself useful while you still live here." For a second, everything stopped. The clock on the wall ticked once, sharp as a pin. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but something quieter, denser. "Useful," I repeated. She nodded without looking at me. "We all contribute, Richard. You don't just get to stay here because it's convenient." Her words hung in the air, like the scent of her perfume, expensive, cold, suffocating. I thought about what she didn't say, that this was the house I built. The down payment had come from my retirement fund, the renovations from my consulting projects, and the furniture chosen with Elaine before cancer took her. Every corner of this place was a chapter of my life. And yet, here I was, a guest in the home I'd paid for. The front door opened, and Andrew's voice broke the silence. Hey, honey, Dad, he called, dropping his keys in the bowl by the stairs. He still called me Dad, though lately it sounded more like a formality than an expression of affection. He glanced between us, sensing tension. Isabel didn't even turn her head. Your father's having trouble understanding how things work around here, she said. Andrew frowned, looking at me. Dad? I just asked for a moment, I said simply. It's just tea, Isabel murmured. Elaine used to sit there, I said quietly, nodding toward the recliner. Isabel blinked, as if surprised I'd mentioned my late wife at all. Oh, she said, her tone flat. I didn't realize. Of course, she realized. Everyone knew that chair. It was sacred ground to me. Andrew rubbed the back of his neck. Dad, maybe just let it go, okay? It's not a big deal. Not a big deal, I repeated. That's what everything becomes, isn't it? Not a big deal. He sighed, looking embarrassed. Come on, don't make this awkward. Isabel didn't mean anything by it. She smiled then, a faint and victorious smile. See, Andrew understands. I watched the two of them. My son, his expensive watch glinting under the light, the faint smell of her perfume clinging to his shirt. The picture was perfect, if you didn't look too closely. I'd once imagined Andrew as the kind of man who'd stand up for what's right, the kind of man who'd defend family, not convenience. But maybe I'd taught him the wrong lessons. I'd given him everything: tuition at Wharton, the startup money, the down payment on this mansion overlooking Long Island Sound. Over $1 million in total, if I counted every loan forgiven, every temporary expense that never came back. And in return, he'd given me a spare bedroom and a schedule. Isabel stretched, her silk robe slipping slightly off her shoulder. Since you're up, Richard, she said lazily, could you grab the mail on your way back? I'm expecting something from Cartier. That did it. Something inside me went very, very still. Andrew saw it. The shift, the sudden clarity that comes right before a storm. Dad, he said quickly, please don't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. This is my house, I said evenly. Isabel's eyes flashed, and she sat up. Excuse me? My name's on the deed, I continued, my tone calm, almost conversational. Every square inch of this place exists because I built it, with money, with time, with memory. And yet, I walk in to find myself taking orders in my own living room. Andrew stepped forward, lowering his voice. Dad, don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just remembering where I am. Isabel stood, her chin lifted. If you don't like how we do things, you're welcome to find another place to live. Andrew didn't stop her. That hurt more than her words ever could. The silence afterward was the longest of my life. Finally, I nodded. All right, I said softly. Andrew looked startled. Wait, Dad, what do you mean? I mean, I said, picking up the grocery bags again. I'll take your advice. Isabel's smirk faltered. What? I'll find another place to live. I didn't look at them as I walked down the hall to my room. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the house, steady, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock that had been reset. In my bedroom, everything was as it had been for years, tidy, organized, untouched by their taste. I took down the suitcase from the closet shelf, the same one Elaine and I had used for our trip to Florence 30 years ago. The leather was cracked, the brass latches dulled, but it still held the faint scent of cedar. I began to pack. Shirts, socks, the framed photo of Elaine by the lake, my passport, though I didn't know why. Maybe habit, maybe hope. Down the hall I could hear their voices, low, urgent, arguing now. Andrew's tone is pleading, Isabel's sharp. I caught fragments. He's serious. Let him cool off. He can't just leave like this. They didn't understand. I wasn't leaving in anger. I was going in clarity. When I came back down the hallway with the suitcase, Isabel was standing by the kitchen island, arms folded. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're overreacting." "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather overreact now than die quietly later." Andrew looked pale. "Dad, please don't go. We'll talk tomorrow." I paused at the door, studying him. The boy who used to climb onto my shoulders at the beach. The man who'd grown into someone I barely recognized. "Tomorrow," I said, "you'll wake up and realize I meant what I said." The sun was setting as I stepped outside, suitcase rolling behind me across the stone path I'd designed myself, back when I believed this house would be my legacy. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Some sights are better left unseen. That night, in a small seaside motel room with flickering fluorescent lights, I placed my keys on the nightstand. They were still warm from my hand, the last warmth of a home that no longer existed. I sat on the bed, listening to the waves against the rocks outside, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not comfort, not safety. Just the beginning of freedom. The room smelled faintly of salt and detergent, clean, impersonal, and temporary. A place meant for passing through, not for staying. The walls were pale blue, the color of exhaustion. Outside, the ocean murmured against the rocks, a rhythmic and indifferent sound. It was just after midnight, and the only light in the room came from the small lamp on the nightstand and the glow of my laptop screen. That glow filled the space like quiet firelight, soft, steady, unwavering. I sat at the little table by the window, a cup of motel coffee cooling beside me, and opened the banking folder I'd kept organized for years. Decades of my life existed on those spreadsheets. Transfers, tuition, invoices, tax returns, even the line items of a wedding I hadn't planned but paid for. The numbers stared back at me, not as figures, but as memories. $180,000. Andrew's MBA at Wharton. That had been a proud moment. I'd written the check myself, sitting at Elaine's desk, telling her that our son was going to have the opportunities we never did. "It's an investment in his future," I'd said. She'd smiled and kissed my hand. We both believed it. $300,000, down payment on the house in Greenwich. I'd transferred the money in one afternoon, no hesitation. The market was good back then. Andrew had just married Isabel, a woman of grace and culture, as she'd called herself during our first dinner together. I'd wanted him to feel secure, to build a family, to have roots. And then there was $100,000, the wedding in Provence. Her family had insisted on a chateau, something picturesque. When her father backed out last minute, citing financial restructuring, I stepped in. I remember Elaine's voice in my head, calm and steady. "It's only money, Richard. Love is what matters." But Elaine was gone by then. and love had become an expensive illusion. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. My reflection stared at me in the window. An older man with silver hair and tired eyes, illuminated by the cold light of technology. I barely recognized him. There was no anger in me. Not yet. Just an ache. Dull, consistent, like a bruise that had forgotten where it started. I opened my email and began scrolling through the messages. Mortgage confirmations, credit card statements, automatic transfers labeled household support. Every transaction was a thread tying me to the life I'd just left. My cursor hovered over the first one. Automatic payment. Hale Residence Mortgage. $4,300 month. I clicked cancel. A window popped up. Are you sure you want to stop this payment? I stared at the house, questioned for a moment. Then, quietly, yes. The next one was the auto insurance, both cars under my name, though I hadn't driven Andrew's Tesla or Isabel's Range Rover once. Cancel. Then the Greenwich Country Club membership. Annual fee, $12,000. I'd paid that one out of habit. I remembered Andrew saying it was important for networking. Networking had turned into golf and gossip. Cancel. Each click felt lighter, quieter, like untying a knot that had been cinched too tight for too long. There was no satisfaction, only stillness. I poured myself another cup of coffee and watched the screen update with new balances, the numbers recalibrating themselves as though life were being slowly returned to me. For years, I'd convinced myself that giving was love. That sacrifice was the same as devotion. But somewhere along the way, I'd blurred the line between generosity and servitude. Elaine had warned me once, years ago. You can give him everything, Richard, she'd said, but don't give him the idea that he owes you nothing. I hadn't listened. Love, in my mind, had always been a form of protection, even when no one asked for it, especially then. Now, sitting in that quiet room by the sea, I realized protection had become enablement. I took out a yellow notepad and began to write. Not a letter, a list. A ledger of every act of assistance I could remember. Tuition, housing, insurance, even the small indulgences, vacations, appliances, furniture. Each line was an admission, a confession of the part I'd played in my own undoing. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, the total exceeded $1 million. $1 million. I said the number aloud, just to hear it. It sounded absurd. Outside, the wind shifted, and the waves grew louder. Somewhere beyond the glass, a foghorn moaned, long and low. I imagined the sound carrying out into the night, echoing off the dark water like the voice of something ancient. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the dryness of my skin. Elaine would have scolded me for that. She always said I never used lotion. You'll turn into sandpaper before 70, she'd tease. I smiled at the memory, a small crack in the stillness. The clock on the microwave read 1:17 a.m. I wasn't tired. Sleep felt like a language I no longer spoke. Instead, I opened a new document on my laptop, a blank page, white and expectant. At the top, I typed, Plan for Financial Independence, R. Hale. I'd written hundreds of financial plans in my career, most for clients who'd never followed them. This one wasn't for profit. It was for peace, Maho. Step 1. Freeze all joint accounts. Step 2. Redirect mail to temporary address. Step 3. Update legal beneficiary documents. Step 4. Notify the pension office of the address change. Step 5. Transfer savings to private investment account. Each bullet point felt like the tightening of a foundation. Quiet, deliberate, necessary. Worked until nearly 3. The room was silent except for the soft clicking of keys and the occasional sound of waves hitting the shore. When I finally closed the laptop, the reflection of its blue light lingered on my face. I studied it for a long moment, seeing a man stripped of everything he'd used to define himself: father, provider, architect of other people's dreams. Now he was just Richard Hale. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the night was silver, the moon hanging low, the ocean stretching out like a vast mirror. I could see my breath against the glass, faint and human, proof that I was still here. In the reflection, I spoke softly, not to anyone but to the air, to the ghosts that listened. I wasn't angry, I was awake. The words surprised me with how true they felt. I opened the window slightly. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Somewhere down the road, a distant buoy bell chimed. One note, over and over, patient and steady. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive with forgiveness, I murmured. It arrives with boundaries. I left the window open and lay down on the bed, hands folded on my chest. The sheets were rough, but the air felt clean. For years, I'd slept in a house full of noise, footsteps, arguments, the mechanical laughter of people who mistook comfort for love. Now I lie in silence. It wasn't warm, but it was honest. As I drifted toward sleep, I imagined Elaine's voice, quiet as ever, saying the things she used to say whenever I finished one of my architectural models. Start again, Richard, but this time build it right. Outside, the ocean answered her with the same rhythm it always had. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could. Mornings by the sea have a way of making even regret look beautiful. Mist rolled in over Mystic Sound like a slow tide, swallowing the docks and the fishing boats one by one. I stood by the motel window, watching the fog creep inland, a coffee cup warming my hands. The air smelled of rain, salt, and something clean, like the promise of a fresh start. It had been 3 days since I left the house. 3 long, quiet days where I learned what solitude honestly sounded like. A refrigerator's hum, the rustle of motel curtains, the occasional seagull crying out like an unanswered thought. I'd finished all the financial cuts. Everything automated was gone now. The payments, the transfers, the quiet bleeding of my accounts that had run for years. For the first time in a decade, my money stayed where I left it. But peace, I found, doesn't last long when truth begins to surface. It came mid-morning, from a name I hadn't seen in years, Mark Jensen. He'd been a partner at my old firm, an honest man in a dishonest industry, one of the few I still respected. His voice, when it came through, was the same, slow, deliberate, built for bad news. Richard, I wasn't sure whether to call, he began, but I think you should hear this from me. I sat at the table, the coffee cooling between my palms. Go ahead. Your son-in-law, Andrew's wife, Isabel, she came by the office last month, said she wanted to discuss a home equity line. I said nothing, though something profound in me already knew where this was going. She claimed the Greenwich house was hers, Mark continued. that you'd transferred ownership before retiring. She even had documentation. What kind of documentation? Forged, obviously. Sloppy job, too. Our legal team caught it during title verification. But she signed your name, Richard, in front of a notary who clearly didn't care enough to check. He paused, letting the words find gravity. We rejected the loan, of course, but I thought you'd want to know. I stared at the notepad on the table, the list of expenses I'd written 3 nights earlier, each act of generosity that had carried me here, a lifetime of giving, and now they were trying to steal what was left. Thank you, Mark, I said quietly. You did the right thing. Richard. Mark hesitated. This wasn't just a financial move. She's desperate. I've heard whispers, casinos, private debts, something about a Monte Carlo fund. I almost laughed, but it came out dry. Monte Carlo. How poetic. I'll send you copies of the documents, he said, for your records. And Richard, be careful. Desperate people don't always stay polite. The documents arrived that evening, delivered by overnight mail. I spread them out on the bed beneath the lamp, loan forms, bank statements, even a falsified deed. My signature, forged but convincing. It was like looking into a distorted mirror, my own name staring back at me, attached to lies I'd never spoken. I traced the pen strokes with a finger, slow and steady. She really thought she could take it, I murmured. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about violation, about the quiet cruelty of people who take from kindness and call it theirs. I turned the page and saw the appraisal estimate Isabel had included with her forged submission. She'd valued the house at $2.3 million. $2.3 million. My home. My history. My late wife's laughter echoes in those walls. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. The ocean whispered outside, calm and relentless. You can give him everything, Richard, but don't give him the idea that he owes you nothing. Elaine's voice again, like a tide that refused to recede. This time I listened. The next morning, I drove into town. Mystic's courthouse sat on a hill overlooking the harbor, a brick building framed by old oak trees. The place smelled of polished wood and bureaucracy. I'd been there years ago, drawing up blueprints for a courthouse renovation project. I never imagined I'd return to file a personal petition. The clerk at the front desk was a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes behind soft glasses. Her nameplate read Marjorie Shaw. Good morning, I said, setting the manila folder on the counter. I need to file an eviction notice for unauthorized occupants. She glanced up. Property address? 41 Pelham Lane, Greenwich. Her eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite a commute. I drove farther for worse reasons. She smiled politely, flipping through the forms I'd filled out the night before. You're the owner? Yes. Name's on the deed. She nodded. And the occupants? My son and daughter-in-law. Her eyes flickered briefly, sympathy maybe, or recognition of a story she'd heard before. I'll process these. Standard 30-day notice applies. If they contest, we'll schedule a hearing. Sheriff will serve them within 48 hours. Thank you. Marjorie stamped the papers with a decisive thud. Eviction notice. Received. The sound was final, satisfying in a way that frightened me a little. As I turned to leave, she said quietly, Mr. Hale, it's never easy doing what's right with family. I paused, hand on the door. No, I said, but it's harder doing nothing. My next stop was the police department, a low concrete building across from the marina. Inside, the air smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. Detective Sarah Monroe greeted me in her cramped office, her desk buried under files. She was in her late 40s, sharp but kind-eyed, the sort of person Elaine would have liked. "Richard Hale," she said, shaking my hand. "Haven't seen you since the Civic Foundation fundraiser. What brings you here?" "Fraud," I said simply. That got her attention. Over the next hour, I explained everything. Isabel's forged paperwork, the attempted loan, the financial exploitation, the emotional coercion. Sarah took notes quietly, occasionally glancing up to study my face. When I finished, she leaned back, thoughtful. "This isn't just fraud," she said. "It's calculated theft. She's been planning this for a while." I nodded. "So it seems." "Richard," she said carefully, "do you want to pursue criminal charges?" I hesitated. The word criminal felt heavy, like something that couldn't be taken back. "No," I said finally. "Not yet. I just want protection. Boundaries." She smiled faintly. "Boundaries. That's a word we don't hear enough in here." "I'll file for a restraining order," I continued. "She's volatile, and I want everything documented." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Smart. I'll keep the report on file, and I'll call my contact at the county records office to flag your deed. If anyone tries to alter ownership again, you'll be notified immediately." She slid her card across the desk. "And Richard, if this escalates, you come to me first. Don't try to handle it alone." I took the card. I've handled people for a living, detective, but I'll keep that in mind. As I left, she called after me. "You know, I heard about Isabel's gambling. Glacier Peaks Casino in New York. Private tables, bad company." "I figured," I said without turning. "There's always a reason someone starts stealing." By evening, I found myself at a small diner near the docks, the kind with vinyl booths and real pie under glass domes. I ordered black coffee and watched the harbor through the window. The waitress, a woman of about my age, refilled my cup without being asked. "Rough day?" she asked. "Clarifying," I said. She chuckled softly. "That's a new one." I smiled, the first real one in days. Most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid clarity. It's messy. She nodded knowingly. "So's pie, but it's worth it." I looked down at my reflection in the dark surface of the coffee. Two eyes, older but clearer. The man looking back wasn't broken. He was rebuilding. Across the diner, a radio played faintly. "Yesterday's gone and tomorrow's still waiting." Fitting, I thought. Back in the motel room, I organized the new paperwork, including the eviction forms, police reports, and scanned evidence. I labeled each folder with precision: financial records, legal proceedings, and personal notes. The desk was small, but the order made it feel like control. At the bottom of the pile was one document I hadn't touched yet: my life insurance policy. Isabel was listed as the secondary beneficiary, after Andrew. I stared at it for a long time before picking up the pen. Amend beneficiary. To the Elaine Hale Memorial Scholarship Fund. A simple signature, and a decade of unquestioning loyalty dissolved into something purer: legacy. I looked at the empty chair across the room and said quietly, "I hope you'd approve, Elaine." The window reflected me again, framed in the blue glow of the laptop. The ocean stretched beyond the glass, endless and calm. In that reflection, I saw two versions of myself: the man who gave without question, and the one who finally began to ask why. I thought of Isabel's face when she'd realized the money was gone, the house reclaimed, her web collapsing. I didn't feel vengeance, only symmetry. Justice, when done right, isn't about punishment. It's about balance. I closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and stood in the darkness for a moment. The room was silent except for the faint whisper of waves. Truth, I whispered, has a sound. It's quiet at first, but it doesn't stop. Outside, the tide shifted again, patient, steady, unstoppable, and for the first time in my life, I felt the same way. The notice was served on a Wednesday afternoon. I imagined the knock on the door, the uniformed deputy standing on the marble porch, Isabel's carefully painted smile cracking as she opened it, the sound of paper sliding into her manicured hand. That was the sound of silence taking its turn to speak. By the time the sheriff's office confirmed delivery, I was sitting in my car outside Harbor Cafe, a small place near Mystic's docks that smelled of fresh bread and salt. The waitress, the same one who'd served me pie earlier that week, smiled when she saw me again. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said. "Usual coffee?" "Yes, please." I liked how she didn't ask questions. People in small towns don't need to. They can read what's written between your silences. I took the coffee to my usual seat by the window and watched the harbor come alive. Fishermen loading gear, tourists drifting by with cameras, seagulls fighting over something invisible. The world kept moving, indifferent to my quiet war. But in Greenwich, I knew things were beginning to move differently. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized. Andrew. I let it ring, then ring again. By the fifth call, I answered. "Dad." His voice was tight, rushed. "What the hell is going on? The sheriff showed up. There's a paper eviction notice," I said calmly. He exhaled like he'd been punched. "You can't do this. It's our home." "It's my house," I corrected. "Your home is wherever you choose to build it. This one was built by my hands, my money, and my memories. You forfeited your right to call it home when you chose to let her run it." Isabel didn't mean... She meant every word. She just didn't expect consequences. He was silent. I could hear muffled voices in the background, Isabel's, sharp and insistent. "Dad," he said finally, voice low, "she's saying you've lost it, that you're not well. People are starting to talk." "I'm sure they are," I said. "She's always been good at talking. I prefer proof." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Ask her about the loan application, or the forged signature, or the gambling debts she thought I wouldn't hear about." He didn't respond. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the faint echo of a slammed door. "I don't believe you," he said finally, but his voice trembled. "You don't have to. Truth doesn't need belief. It just needs time." I hung up before he could answer. For years, I'd thought confrontation meant shouting, declarations, and emotional theatrics. But now I understand. The most powerful confrontation is one that remains calm. It's the refusal to play the part you're assigned in someone else's drama. 2 days later, my phone began to ring again. Not from family, but from the town itself. First, it was Tom Bartlett, my old neighbor from Pelham Lane. "Richard, I don't want to pry, but folks are saying Isabel's telling people you've had some sort of breakdown, that she and Andrew are managing your affairs while you recover." "I see," I said. He hesitated. "Didn't sound right to me." You always seemed sharper than half the lawyers in town. Appreciate that, Tom. Then came Marjorie, the courthouse clerk. Mr. Hale, thought you should know. Your daughter-in-law was here this morning asking about contesting the eviction. Said she has mental competency concerns. I told her the documents looked perfectly in order. Thank you, I said simply. By Friday, half of Greenwich probably thought I was losing my mind. The other half was starting to wonder who was telling the truth. And that was fine. Let the town talk. I'd learned that rumor has the same weakness as debt. It always collapses when truth starts collecting interest. That weekend, I met Detective Sarah Monroe again. Her office was brighter this time, sunlight filtering through the blinds like a promise. She'd been expecting me. Thought you'd stop by, she said, holding up a printed email. Frontier Financial reached out this morning. Isabel's name has been flagged in multiple fraud alerts. Good, I said. And the restraining order? Served, I confirmed. Sarah leaned back in her chair. She's not taking this quietly. Filed a false report yesterday claiming elder exploitation. Says you're being manipulated into making poor financial choices. I smiled faintly. If cutting her off is a poor choice, then I'll live with it. She's grasping, Sarah said. We'll document everything. But be careful, Richard. Desperate people don't go quietly. Neither do dignified ones, I replied. By Monday morning, I made my own calls. Calm, courteous, factual. To the country club. Cancel membership. Yes, permanent. To the auto dealer. The Range Rover and Tesla are no longer under my insurance policy. They'll need their own coverage. To the mortgage bank. The automatic transfer has ended. The property's under legal eviction. And then to Mark Jensen, the one man whose voice still carried weight in the community. Mark, I said, if anyone asks, tell them the truth. He didn't need me to specify. He'd already seen the forgery. Consider it done, he said. Within a week, the story had undergone a significant change. Greenwich thrives on gossip, but it thrives more on revelation. People who'd whispered about my supposed senility now whispered about Isabel's arrogance. Someone mentioned she'd been seen arguing with a casino manager in Stamford. Another claimed Andrew had been fired after a dispute over missing funds. I didn't spread any of it. I didn't need to. Truth is like gravity. It doesn't require your help to pull things down. It was a Tuesday when they showed up. I heard the knock before I saw them through the peephole of my motel door. Andrew, pale and disheveled, and Isabel, dressed as if money could still protect her from consequence. I opened the door halfway. Richard, Isabel began, voice brittle but measured. This has gone far enough. I agree, she blinked. Then rescind the order. Let's handle this privately. I tried that for years, I said. It didn't work. Andrew looked exhausted. Dad, please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You asked me to leave. I did. You asked me to stop interfering. I stopped. You wanted control. Now you have it. Along with the bills, the debts, and the silence that comes after lies. Isabel's composure cracked for a second. You think you can humiliate us? No, I said softly. You did that yourselves. Her eyes narrowed. We'll fight this. You already are, I said. And you're losing. I started to close the door. Andrew's voice caught me mid-motion. Dad, she's pregnant. I paused. Congratulations. She needs stability. Then give it to her. Be the man your mother believed you could be. He looked at me, searching for softness. I had none left to give. "You'll regret this," Isabel hissed. "No," I said. "I've regretted enough already." The door closed with a quiet click. Outside, their muffled argument drifted down the hall, fading into the sound of distant waves. The following week brought updates in the form of silence. No calls, no visits, just a slow unraveling, reported secondhand through people who cared enough to reach out. Tom Bartlett again. "Richard, I saw a moving truck outside your house. Looked like she was packing up." Marjorie from the courthouse. "They never filed a contest. Deadline passed yesterday." Detective Monroe. "Just a heads up. One of Isabel's creditors asked about forwarding addresses. Looks like she's leaving the state." The house on Pelham Lane, the one Elaine and I built from the ground up, was finally empty. The echo of our laughter, our arguments, our years together, it could finally rest. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel loss. I felt completion. That evening, I sat on the motel balcony watching the sky fade from gold to violet. A gull circled overhead, then vanished into the darkening horizon. On the table beside me lay a single envelope. Official confirmation of the property's return of possession. My name. My house, my dignity. All reclaimed, quietly, without a raised voice or a single slammed door. I opened my journal and began to write, as I had each night since leaving Greenwich. The pages had become my confessional, my courtroom, and my sanctuary. There's a power in stillness. I wrote in choosing not to answer every insult, not to feed every fire. Silence, when rooted in truth, becomes the loudest sound in the room. The motel's neon sign flickered against the glass, blue and soft. Somewhere down the hall, a couple argued faintly, the familiar cadence of two people still fighting to be right instead of kind. I closed my eyes and let the sound drift away. Elaine's voice came to me again, tender as always. "Start again, Richard. But this time build it right." I smiled, looking out at the ocean. "I will," I whispered. "This time, I'll build it on peace." There's a particular stillness that arrives only after everything has fallen apart. Not the silence of defeat, but the kind that comes when the noise has finally exhausted itself. That was the silence that found me one October morning on the porch of a small cabin overlooking Sebago Lake in Maine. The air was crisp, the kind that wakes you without cruelty. The leaves had begun their slow transformation, gold bleeding into amber, amber into flame. I sat there with a cup of coffee in my hands and listened to the sound of loons calling across the water. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about loss. I was thinking about continuance. It had been 4 months since Isabel left Greenwich for good. She'd gone quietly, or perhaps she'd simply run out of voices willing to listen. The house had stood empty for weeks before I made my decision. It wasn't impulsive. I'd learned not to act out of emotion. I spent long nights at that motel, walking through the halls of my memory, asking myself what the house had truly meant to me. It wasn't just wood and marble and stone. It was a legacy. It was Elaine's laughter echoing from the kitchen. It was Andrew's tiny hand gripping mine on the staircase. It was the home of beginnings. But beginnings, I realized, weren't meant to be permanent. They were meant to teach us how to start again. And so I signed the papers. The Hale residence, as it had been listed in the town registry for 40 years, was transferred to the Veterans Housing Initiative of Connecticut, a program that built transitional homes for returning soldiers and their families. When the director, a young woman named Maria Santos, asked if I was certain, I told her I'd never been more sure of anything. A home, I said, should belong to those who understand sacrifice. The ribbon-cutting ceremony took place on a mild August afternoon. The house looked the same, but the air felt different, lighter, as if even the walls were relieved. 3 families moved in that day. I stood on the lawn, watching children run through the garden where Elaine used to plant tulips. Laughter replaced what had once been quiet resentment. It felt right. Not poetic, not dramatic, just quietly, deeply right. Maria came up beside me, her uniform crisp, her smile soft. "You've given a lot of people a second chance, Mr. Hale." I shook my head. "No, they've given this house one." She handed me a small wooden plaque, engraved with simple words, "For the man who remembered what home truly means." I didn't speak. Words would have cheapened the moment. That night, back in the cabin, I found an envelope waiting in my mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakably Andrew's, neat, deliberate, a little uncertain. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and stared at it for a while before opening it. "Dad, I don't know where to start, except by saying you were right. About everything. Isabel's gone. She left 2 months ago. I don't know where. The debts, the lies, they were worse than I imagined. I thought I could fix it, but I was just trying to delay the fall. I've been seeing a counselor, trying to understand why I let it happen, why I let her speak for me all those years. I think I was afraid of losing her, the same way I was scared of losing you. But in trying to please her, I lost both. I heard about the house, but what you did, it's who Mom was. I see that now. I miss her. I miss you too. If you'll have me, I'd like to visit. Not to ask for anything. Just to talk. Andrew." The letter trembled slightly in my hands, though not from age. I set it down, folded carefully, and stared out the window toward the lake. Elaine would have smiled. She always said, "Our son will come back to himself one day. You just have to give him enough distance to hear his own voice." She'd been right, as she often was. He came 2 weeks later. A rented pickup pulled into the gravel drive, its tires crunching softly against the stones. When the door opened, I saw not the boy I'd raised or the man who'd betrayed me, but something in between. Tired, thinner, but steady in the way only someone humbled by consequence can be. He walked up the steps slowly, as if afraid the ground might reject him. "Dad," he said. "Andrew." For a long moment we simply stood there. No hugs, no speeches. Just 2 men carrying the weight of everything unsaid. Then I gestured toward the porch chair beside mine. "Coffee?" He nodded. We sat, listening to the water, the wind, the world. "I heard you're working again," I said eventually. He nodded. "Accounting firm in Portland. Junior position. It's quieter than before." "Quiet can be good," I said. "You can hear yourself think." He glanced at me, hesitant. "I think I spent most of my life avoiding that." I smiled faintly. "You come by that honestly. I did too." He looked down at his hands. "Dad, I can't undo what happened, but I want to understand it. I want to earn back your respect. I studied him for a moment. Respect isn't earned all at once, son. It's built the same way a house is, slowly, one honest day at a time. He nodded, eyes glistening. I'll take that. We sat in silence again. The sun had begun its descent, turning the lake's surface to molten gold. As evening deepened, I found myself telling him stories. About Elaine, about the early years of the firm, about the mistakes I'd made that he never saw. He listened, not as a son defending himself, but as a man listening to another man's truth. I thought love meant fixing things, I said. That if I gave enough, supported, it would make people happy. But all it did was teach them they didn't have to grow. Andrew's voice was quiet. And now? Now, I said, I think love is about limits, about saying, I will help you, but I won't save you. He nodded slowly. I wish I'd learned that sooner. So did I said. We stayed there long after the sky turned purple. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. Dad, he said, do you forgive me? I took a breath. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of pine. Forgiveness, I said slowly, isn't something I give you. It's something I do for myself. He looked confused. I forgave you the day I walked out of that house, because if I hadn't, I'd still be living there, even after I left. He nodded, eyes red, but his voice was steady. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. Just live differently. He smiled for the first time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After he left, I stood on the porch, watching his truck disappear down the dirt road. The world around me glowed with the soft fire of autumn, leaves falling like slow rain, the lake turning into a mirror for the sky. I sat back down and looked at the horizon. The sun had nearly set, but not completely. There was still a line of gold clinging stubbornly to the edge of the world. That's what forgiveness looks like, I thought. Not daylight, not darkness, but the quiet light that comes before night. I picked up my notebook, the one I'd started at the motel, and opened it to a blank page. Peace doesn't arrive with justice alone, I wrote. It arrives when justice no longer needs to be proven. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called again, low, mournful, and beautiful. I closed the notebook and leaned back, feeling the chair creak beneath me. Elaine's presence lingered in the evening air, not as a ghost, but as a memory fulfilled. You did it right this time, Richard. Maybe I had. The last light of the day touched the surface of the water one final time before sinking beneath it. And I thought, perhaps, so had I.